Time travel may be one of the most fascinating concepts there is. Along with the exploration of deep space and the depths of black holes, the notion that we could travel to a future far beyond our lifespans and see how the human race developed is both exciting and fascinating. And why just the future? Why not travel to the past and explore the wonders of history and witness firsthand so much of what has been lost to time and erosion? I'm a lover of many time travel stories, from the H.G. Wells' Time Machine in both its book and the 1960 movie adaptation, Back to the Future and Quantum Leap, and that timeless gaming classic, Sonic CD. I love exploring this concept. While time travel is theoretically possible, it does raise questions of, what would happen if we changed the past? Or even, can we change the past? Has always presented something of a mathematical and philosophical conundrum that numerous writers have tackled in different ways. When Remedy Entertainment announced that their next Xbox One exclusive game would be exploring this topic, and unveiled the technology they were developing to implement it, I couldn't have been more on board. There were, however, a couple of problems. The first was that I'd moved to Japan just a year prior, and gaming at home just wasn't that interesting, when something as simple as taking a walk through the city at night was so exciting, and game centers over here are a real experience. Second was the announcement that the story of this game was going to be combined with full episodes of a show that told the story from the perspective of some different characters, and these would play out like extended cutscenes throughout the game. This choice was clearly very polarizing, and at the very least had me waiting for a sale before I decided to jump in. So, should I be going back in time and telling my younger self to get on this sooner? There's only one way to find out. This is Quantum Break. Our story begins with a very ominous introduction, foretelling the breaking of time and indeed its end as a result, before our camera comes to rest on Jack Joyce, who it seems has survived quite the ordeal and is now retelling the events to someone whose origins and business we don't yet know. We are then treated to this beautiful aerial shot of a university campus, and as a taxi containing our hero rolls up during what seems to be some kind of all-night protest, we get a good view of just how gorgeous the Northlight storytelling engine is. Keep an eye on this guy. I have a feeling we'll be seeing him later. This one too, for that matter. Oh hey, I wonder if the new season of Lords and Ladies is on. Wait a second. Alan? Max? Oh wait, Alex. Well, that was certainly something. Jack, far from being interested in the local politics of the fate of an old library versus the machinations of a powerful corporation known as Monarch, has returned from Thailand to the States on account of an urgent message from his best friend, Paul Serene. And after these two share a heartwarming reunion, and Jack is treated to a presentation about black holes and bending the fabric of space and time, Paul explains that he's invited Jack back to help with some less than legal activities concerning a project that he and Will, Jack's genius brother, were working on together. At least up to a point where Will seemed to get cold feet and started doomsaying in a manner that scared away investors. And looking at the scale of this particular project, I suspect quite a lot of money was needed to make it happen. So Jack is given the highly technical task of throwing a lever, which makes this happen.
The core replicates the effects of a rotating micro-black hole, so activating it can be a bit intense.
And as if creating a micro-black hole on a university campus wasn't enough, it only really dawns on our hero that Paul is actually ready to attempt time travel as this overly elaborate corridor forms up. So while our boy Jack is killing it in the looks and, as we'll soon discover, physical stats, he may not be the sharpest tool in the shed. The first time travel attempt goes flawlessly, and ahead of schedule. But when they set up to go to the future, that's when things go bad. This here is Jack's brother Will, and he's really not happy about what he's seeing here. So much so that he's willing to point a gun at his own brother to try to stop it, though it really doesn't seem to help.
No, I gotta let you out. Oh God! Oh no! 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 No!
As Jack comes to, he finds himself caught in the game's first time stutter. And there's going to be a lot of these between now and the countdown to the end of all time. Again, we get to appreciate just how awesome this new game engine looks, even with all these effects going off. Jack is able to pull his brother into the stutter, and as he takes in the situation, he starts to talk about a she who warned him that all this was coming and how it's now too late. Jack tries to get Paul out of the time machine, only to have the stutter collapse, at which point Monarch soldiers burst through the door, more than willing to shoot on sight, causing Jack and Will to make a break for it, and for Paul to escape via the only means available to him, through the time machine. Jack and Will escape as guards shout, "He's here!" and guns blaze behind them. As they make their way through the guts of the machine, they are confronted by a soldier, and in desperation, Jack... Damn. We are soon turned loose on the game's combat in earnest, as Jack and Will battle to escape the campus. Will explains he had been preparing for the possibility of a time fracture, and had even built something to counter it. They just need to get to his car to find... something. The building, however, is swarming with Monarch private soldiers, though there is one more time stutter that allows Jack to relieve quite a few of them of their weapons without any trouble. As the danger ramps up though, something inside Jack reacts and starts to manifest as abilities he can use to gain an edge in battle. This doesn't exactly stop the soldiers from getting to his brother, but then this happens.
You're Jack Joyce.
Where is he? Where's my brother?
They're taking him to the library. You might still be able to catch them.
Why are you helping me? You're with them.
It's more complicated than...
A friendly face.
Jack, run!
A she, no less. Interesting. Jack is able to rescue Will. And if you've been wondering all this time how convenient it was for these heavily armed paramilitary types to show up at the exact moment everything goes wrong, well, here's your explanation.
Jack!
This is not the same man we just saw. This is a much older and far more focused looking person than the guy who greeted us at the door, and it's quite clear he's not here for a reunion. It seems Paul has come back the long way round, living 17 years to come back here and once again see the end of time, and he is convinced now there's no way to stop it, and is more than willing to end his former friend's life to see through whatever he has planned. This is a hell of an opening chapter, and really sets the tone for things to come.
Trigger. I never wanted this.
But this isn't just a story about Jack Joyce. Far from it, in fact. At several points in the story, we get to take control of our antagonist, Paul. See? I told you this guy would be back. And see things from his perspective, but also make certain choices that will have a mild impact on certain parts of the story. More importantly though, we get to catch a glimpse of our villain's motivations. It was a matter of minutes for Jack between leaving Paul in the time machine and meeting him again at the library entrance. But for Paul, it was 17 years. And before he went back, he went forward and witnessed the end of time. An event that he believes completely inevitable, and as such, he believes the only possible action is to prepare for something after. This is also the story of Liam Burke. Remember this guy? But his adventure takes place in the live-action show that runs adjacent to our game. I'll be talking more about that later, as the integration into the game is minimal. For now, you need only know that this girl's name is Beth, she's not working for Monarch, but rather is trying to stop the end of time, and this is how Jack escapes.
Is now dead.
The area where they've brought Jack is called Ground Zero, and seems to be linked to both the time fracture and Will's work in the past, and is a location for a lot of very strange things, and some foreshadowing of what's to come. What's important here though, is that he finally meets up with Beth Wilder, after a pretty desperate escape from a destroyed ship, and together they head to an old swimming pool to discover that Will had quite a few secrets of his own. First, there is this videotape, a message to Beth made back in 2010 claiming that the countermeasure had already been taken from his old workshop, the now Ground Zero from the previous chapter. This is interesting because Beth claims to have never even met Will, at least not yet anyway. This is a time travel story after all. Once inside the pool though, yeah. Remember this time machine? Well, here it is, moved piece by piece and set up here. This was where Will did his first experiments in time travel. Jack sees this as an opportunity to simply go back and stop the fracture from ever happening at the university. Or another option would be to go back to 2010 and be the ones who actually took the countermeasure. Either way, the plan hits a snag when Jack's lever-throwing and key-turning abilities prove inefficient at starting a machine designed to create micro-black holes and bend the fabric of space-time in some ordered way. Beth suggests, shall we say, enlisting the assistance of Monarch scientist Sophia Monreal, who will be at a Monarch banquet tonight. Jack, not possessing an invitation to this fine event, comes up with a rather unique entrance strategy based on something Paul told him earlier.
You'll meet me tonight at the Monarch Gala.
Meeting
Yes,
you
you are. I've already seen it happen.
And so we enter another great action set piece, with guns, time powers and stutters going off all over the place to come to... Can we just take a moment to enjoy a side-by-side here? This was one of the big reveal moments when the game was announced, and it's interesting to see how far things came from then. Jack and Beth are able to secure Dr. Monreal, and while Beth escapes on a boat, Jack is forced to use more conventional means of travel. And as he crosses a bridge, we get a real sense of how dangerous these time stutters are. We'll talk more about this spectacular sequence later. Back at the pool, Sophia fixes the time machine, but betrays Beth and Jack, sending Beth to the very end of time to chase Paul back to the past, and Jack to head to 2010, in search of the countermeasure. When Jack arrives, he finds...
Beth?
She's been waiting a long time, and she hasn't been idle. She's the one who told Will about the future, about the fracture and the countermeasure, and even told her younger self exactly the path her life is going to take from now on. Much like Paul though, she's seen the end of time, and had every attempt she made to prevent it blow up in her face. It seems impossible to change what is to come. In fact, trying to change it simply makes her the catalyst for the event. She is far more jaded and worn out now, but Jack convinces her not to give up, to try one last time with him to go after the countermeasure. That moment doesn't exactly work out for anyone involved, and it's the eruption of power from the countermeasure that actually creates Ground Zero and breaks time. In the aftermath, Jack is flung back to 2016 and is made to watch an echo of something he really doesn't want to see.
I'm not wrong.
You can't.
No!
At this stage too, we are beginning to understand Paul's master plan. In his mind, since the end of time is inevitable, rather than trying to stop it, Paul has made a plan for what will come after, if indeed after time is something we can even conceive of. He has created a lifeboat, a safe space where great minds can work to restart time in some way or another and begin a new world. Jack isn't about to squander their one chance on that, and assaults Monarch's headquarters like an unstoppable force of nature to take back the countermeasure from the heart of the lifeboat. But he is once again less than qualified to use it, and so he heads for Monarch's time machine to go back and get the only man he knows who can use the damn thing. Remember that gunfire from earlier? Well, it turns out those paramilitary types weren't talking about Jack. At least, not the one we were controlling at the time anyway. And remember this? I had my suspicions from the get-go, but I won't lie and say that I wasn't literally whooping with joy when this happened. And so, together, Jack and Will return to the present, and the very penultimate moment of time itself, to face off against Paul and try to save all of time and space. The integration of live-action movies into games and uniting the media of TV and interactive entertainment into one seamless experience has been explored in various ways, and most of them haven't really panned out. That's not to say that everything was objectively bad, but in the past there were obvious limitations on the types of experiences available. You need only take a look at the Wikipedia article on interactive film to see how far back this little experiment goes. From games that actually use full motion video for graphics, to adaptations going both ways, to massive multimedia stories spread over comics, movies, games, and animations, there have been many attempts to unify the different entertainment mediums. I myself have memories of playing and indeed enjoying Laserdisc arcade games such as Space Pirates, something I would always beg my parents for money to play on when we went to the cinema, as well as several FMV-based games on the Mega CD, such as Ground Zero Texas and Sherlock Holmes. I even got wrapped up in all that Matrix stuff, and I'm not gonna say I didn't have a good time, but were the games actually good? Well, not really. Aside from a couple of standout adaptations, like the Gungrave anime, or something like the Chronicles of Riddick game, these two mediums really don't seem to understand each other or their audiences. Of course, in the past, there was always a but floating in the air. A what if, so to speak. What if budgets were bigger? What if real professional actors could be used? What if there was enough production and development time to create a more complete, polished project? Or the technology was good enough to blend the real movies and the 3D graphics seamlessly? The question was much like with the early attempts at VR. Was there a way to make this actually work that we just hadn't reached yet? Or was this idea truly a dead end? Well, here's Remedy, slicing up their 8th generation game with 30-minute episodes of a professionally shot, directed, edited, and acted TV show that was easily on par with anything a streaming service was producing at the time. Combined with the level of detail available in their in-house Northlight engine, and using 3D scans of faces for character models and textures, the transition from live action to game is far less jarring than before. So, with all that taken into account, does it work? Kinda. So is this as good as it gets? Or is there something that could be done better the next time someone tries this experiment? Maybe. It's really difficult to say, unfortunately. I am glad it was Remedy who tried it, and that they went all in on this and didn't half-arse it. Remedy have been creating narrative-driven experiences since Max Payne, and their writing and characters have always been top class. Speaking as someone who does not watch TV and doesn't have a streaming service subscription of any kind, I can say that I actually enjoyed the shows, and they did a good job of further immersing me in the world, and gave me a chance to get to know characters who I otherwise wouldn't have. The production quality here was really high, and everyone involved gave an incredible performance. So it's good, right? I mean, yeah. But would I have preferred another couple of hours of game instead of a movie? You bet I would. And I think that's the real problem here, and why this whole interactive movie thing is kind of a dead end, or will at least only ever have a niche audience. While on the surface it could be argued that games and movies offer similar experiences, and that we engage with both for escapism, when you get down to it, it's simply not the case. Movies are a very passive form of entertainment, while games are very active. For this reason, it's very important to note that the show has very little to do with Jack Joyce. And while this was the right move, it creates a problem that we'll talk about later. Joyce is the player's avatar in the game, so were we to be watching him clean house in the show, we would definitely be thinking, why aren't I in control here? In games, we assert a good degree of control on the narrative. Even with very linear stories, we in some way put a stamp on those events, even if it's just deciding which Goomba lives or dies. We get frustrated at games in a way we never would at a TV show or a movie. With movies, we are just along for the ride, but in games, we are steering the ship. So when trying to tell a story using both mediums, we are left in a position where we can't really have the important events of our game protagonist being resolved in the TV show. If for no other reason, then some players may simply skip it entirely. Instead, we are confined to fleshing out side plots and other characters that only a percentage of the audience will even care about. And while the Quantum Break show is really good, it sort of puts me in mind of all those Star Wars stories about Jedi who existed in hiding during the reign of the Empire. These characters may be interesting in and of themselves, but their stories amount to little more than locking the universe into a holding pattern until Luke is ready to go blow up the Death Star. Interesting, yes, but kind of pointless overall. One big exception here would be the moment Joyce goes to take the countermeasure from the lifeboat protocol. Depending on which choice we take at one of the injunctions, we are going to have a significant crossover point with one of two characters from the show. My initial choice led to me having a standoff with the character of Burke. And this is important because when we meet him, we know he isn't just another faceless enemy. We've spent a good amount of time with this guy. We know his story and his motivations. We know there's a real person under that mask. A man with a wife and a baby on the way, who's just doing what he thinks needs to be done to protect the people he cares about most in the world. We've seen him get angry, get hurt, and we've seen him kick ass. Jack even meets him very briefly at an early point in the story, though to Jack, he's just another striker standing between him and the countermeasure. Mechanically, Burke is just another striker enemy, with a little more health, who activates a power dampening field at the moment the fight starts, effectively forcing you to fight him with just guns. This is what I would usually consider a cheap move. It's the same as when boss fights in JRPGs are immune to status magic. The game gave me those powers, and I invested time in upgrading them and learning to wield them effectively, even developing something of an individual playstyle based on my preference. And then, at a climactic point, I'm effectively being told to play a different game? How does that work? Under normal circumstances, this would bother me, but here I think we're getting something more like a boss fight subversion. Even without your powers, Burke is barely a threat at all. I took him down pretty quickly, and with little to no trouble overall. Burke isn't about being a super dangerous enemy who can match Jack move for move. He's about putting a face on every soldier Jack's gunned down up until this point. Now sure, we get a little up close and personal with some of these guys earlier on, and find them to be less than model citizens who are just doing a job. But you now have to wonder, how many of these faceless guards are in fact just like Burke? People with families and stories, and a path that started with their birth and ended when they stood between Joyce and his objective. Could it be argued that Jack murdering his way through Monarch's private security is any more or less moral than the actions Paul has taken to secure the future of all life? Jack may not realize the significance of the face staring at him after the fight, but we do. And it makes us think, if only for a moment. I think this is one of the better ways the show interacts with the game and works to paint a bigger picture of what's going on here. I stand by my previous statement that I'd still have preferred to have all this play out in-game, but this is by no means a bad way to go about it. I feel like talking about this game's presentation is kind of doing it a disservice when we could just look at it and clearly see there's something quite special going on here. My most recent dip back into the 8th generation's visuals was with Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, which was pretty solid all around, but still plagued with many of the problems that gaming characters have had for a very long time, facial animations being a big one. For whatever reason, despite an old game like Vampire the Masquerade actually really nailing it, a lot of big narrative games have also suffered from fairly static faces capable of very limited expressions. And going back to Alan Wake, it's quite clear that this was a problem here too. Now, I'm not exactly a graphics person. That is to say, I don't think amazing graphics equals a good game, and I don't for a second think that every game should be striving for cutting-edge visuals. I am, however, big on aesthetics, which is something graphics serve. Without diving too deeply into it, there's a reason that stylish games like Grim Fandango and even something like Sonic the Hedgehog work even now, when plenty of other games that were rocking what were once top-of-the-line visuals now look old and clunky. Graphics are like any other tool in an artist's box. You pick the right one for the right expression. When Remedy were developing their early builds of Alan Wake 2, they found themselves constantly wrestling with roadblocks and limitations presented by that engine. So when the project was ultimately scrapped in favour of an entirely new IP, Remedy realised that to really capture the cinematic storytelling feel they wanted, they were going to have to build something new from the ground up. The final product of that labour was the Northlight storytelling engine, which was used for both this game and their next outing with Control. Character models and animations in this engine are incredibly believable, and the detail level allows for really expressive faces, which is no small feat all things considered. Remedy have been big on using real faces for their characters since the first Max Payne game, with Lake famously taking the lead role in the first game, and it being handed over to Timothy Gibbs for the sequel. Quantum Break, far from being the exception, was going to need to be much more convincing, as the digital avatars of the actors would now be playing alongside their real-life counterparts, and Remedy no doubt wanted to make the transition as seamless as possible, and overall, I'd say they absolutely nailed it. As a 3D artist myself, I know the chase for realism can often land you in that worst of all places, the uncanny valley, and given the reactions Mass Effect Andromeda provoked for landing in that exact same place, this is not something to be taken lightly. But games are not just their characters. In many ways, environments are characters unto themselves, breathing spectacle and wonder into games, and in the case of Quantum Break, proactively trying to kill you. Now, from the get-go, the environments in Quantum Break are easily up to the standard of anything else released this generation, and that's not a big surprise considering who's making this. However, it's in the various time stutters that things start to get extra, for better or worse. Mostly for the better. But there's one small gripe to bring up. Actually, let's get it out of the way now. Visual garbage clogging my screen when I'm trying to play an intense action game. It's not a big problem, but between the ripple effects and the slowdown explosions that can happen when taking down certain enemies, it can be very easy to quickly lose sight of what you're shooting at and just wind up firing your gun wildly while your enemy turns around on you and sizes you up for a takedown. But this isn't a massively recurring issue, so we'll leave it there. On account of the time stutters, however, we get some really incredible moments where entire firefights can simply freeze up, or in one of the best set pieces have massive parts of the scenery being destroyed and frozen in several sections. No doubt a bunch of this stuff is hand animated versus being controlled by the Northlight engine's physics, but it's still really incredible to behold and must have been a lot of work to get right. So I'd say overall that aesthetics and presentation here are very much one of the game's strong points. A studio had a very clear vision of the type of experience they wanted to create, and couldn't find anything on the market that was a perfect fit. So they basically built their own engine with blackjack and hookers, and absolutely knocked it out of the park. So I'm starting to see a pattern here. Are you? Why don't we take a look? So Remedy clearly knows what they're good at and basically iterates on that in subsequent games. This is by no means bad. I mean, I love it when studios pull something completely original out of the works, but there's nothing wrong with sticking to what works for you, and honestly, in game development, even that can't exactly be considered playing it safe. So what is the Remedy formula? Well, it seems to be stylish third-person action games with a heavy narrative focus, and some kind of synergistic powers or tools that work to add depth and strategy to the combat, and create a unique experience. We've already talked about this game's story, so let's focus on the latter part. In Max Payne, we had bullet time. In Alan Wake, we had a selection of light-based tools to fight the Taken. Jack Joyce has a collection of timey-wimey powers at his disposal, and, spoiler alert, it only gets better. So much better. But that's in the future. Let's stay here with Jack and Quantum Break for now. Jack has several powers at his disposal. The three you'll probably get the most use out of, though, are his time stop field, his time rush maneuver, and his time vision? Okay. His Batman detective vision. The latter is used to help with locating enemies, something much needed when you're in the middle of a stutter and there's a lot of visual garbage clogging up your screen. But also really great for getting an idea of where they are before you enter into a combat arena, so you can try to plan some kind of strategy. Stealth isn't really an option here, but you can at least think about where you'd like to expend your powers first, and who you'd rather deal with while they're on cooldown. It's also needed for finding the chronon particles that are scattered throughout the various environments. Rather than having some kind of XP based system, powers are upgraded by locating these chronon particles. This encourages exploration and going off the beaten path, while limiting the available upgrade points you have in a game. You can't cheese the difficulty by grinding low level encounters basically. The downside here is that chronon particles can only be detected using time vision, and only within a limited range. So you end up spending a lot of the game ignoring the gorgeous environments in favour of having this grey filter over everything, as you are constantly checking around for them. The other issue with exploration is that characters can be expecting you to follow them and will just keep talking while you run around in the next room looking for these. Time Stop and Time Rush, on the other hand, are so much fun. Time Stop does exactly what it says it does. It creates a bubble around an enemy that freezes them in place for a limited time, thus removing them from the conflict. You can take this opportunity to empty an entire clip from your machine gun into the bubble and have all the bullets slam into the enemy at once when it wears off. This is especially useful for bringing down heavier, more bullet-spongy enemies, and it can also help with crowd control for regular goons, even if it's just by locking enemies down so you can get out of a tight corner. Time Rush is also great for controlling the battlefield. Given you're always outnumbered, and the AI here is smart enough to try and flank you, surround you, and flush you out with grenades, this thing is gonna save your life a lot. Quantum Break does have cover-based mechanics like Max Payne 3, but unlike that game, it's not the only way to play. Using cover is just one of a multitude of options you have for dealing with your enemies, and honestly, this game will punish you for staying in one place for too long. Time Rush is great at keeping you moving, but also for confusing enemies, since to them, you just blink out of existence. Another great touch is that if you aim your gun the moment you complete a dash, you activate a bullet time effect, allowing you to line up and fire on enemies before they can react. This is very useful against striker enemies, who can also time rush, as they have these clunky looking contraptions on their back that allows them to move around inside stutters. Using the time rush, it's pretty easy to slip behind them and blow these devices, kicking them out of battle, and it's really important for bringing down super heavy enemies too. The power unlocks are front loaded at the start of the game, but you do have to go through a few missions before you can access them all. There's a bomb style power that's great for taking out long range targets, a shield to get a moment's respite when your health is low, and an upgrade to time dash that's important for traversal, but also this. That never gets old. This game isn't as combat focused as Remedy's previous outings, for better or worse. Traversal is also a big part of the game's formula, and a few of your powers are going to be very useful here. Quantum Break is a largely linear game, so pretty much everything you encounter here is in some way pre-scripted. This isn't an immersive sim that lets you get creative with your abilities, which is kind of a shame. But on the other hand, some of the set pieces are absolutely insane. As mentioned in the story section, due to the fracture in time, there are time stutters that increase in frequency as we approach its inevitable end. To most people, these stutters don't even register unless they come out of them in the middle of something completely insane. For Jack and anyone appropriately equipped, however, they manifest as extended periods of frozen time, with various glitches in reality presenting both threats and opportunities for traversal. Kinda like what it must have been like playing... Okay, maybe I need to back off this one. So, getting back to traversal. We've really come a long way since... Joyce is actually very able-bodied, and capable of a wide variety of platforming feats. All of these are very well animated and smooth, so platforming, far from being a chore, is actually fun in this game. There are also mini traversal puzzles, where Joyce has to reverse time in a small area to make certain inaccessible areas accessible for a short time. Now what does this remind me of? But it's when we enter into a stutter that things get really fun. I'm going to highlight the ship sequence here, as it's easily the most dramatic and exciting moment for this, and really shows off what the Northlight engine is capable of in terms of spectacle. It all begins when Joyce is trying to cross a bridge to get from point A to point B, and well, this happens. Now caught in a stutter that could end at any moment, Joyce has no choice but to push on forward, and this is the ultimate test of those traversal skills and environmental puzzle solving skills you've been working on this whole game. A traversal boss battle, you might say. Here, you'll be engaging in all of the regular platforming stuff, while also using your time stop bubble to freeze up dangerously glitching objects, and using your time rush to sprint through exceptionally dangerous areas. However, it seems like for every step you take forward, you wind up taking two back, as the stutter keeps, well, stuttering. And Joyce is thrown through hoops and has his available route direction switched back on him. This is an incredible set piece, and very exciting and satisfying to get through. That being said, I would have liked a few more combat arenas as well. And I mean that as a compliment, because the combat is as good here as in any Remedy game, if not better. They've always been good at this sort of thing, and the environment and enemies have enough variety to keep you guessing, and to make you feel like a total badass when you succeed in clearing an area. This game shares similar problems with Max Payne 3, in that there's a lot of stopping and starting. Being a very narrative-driven experience, you can find intense combat arenas being broken up with lengthy story moments, and while I love the story, the length of these narrative interludes does pull me out of the flow state you reach when you've been playing a game for a while, and I find myself having to, figuratively speaking, remember where my thumbs and the buttons on the pad are once it all gets moving again. It's not as invasive as Max Payne 3, where it felt like it was happening every time I turned a corner or walked through a door, but it's still a little jarring. The game also has a lot of files and emails for you to locate, and this is actually encouraged through the timeline feature that can be accessed in the options screen. This is all world building really. Most of this information is not essential to finishing the game or understanding any of the major events and twists in the story, Though, if like me, you skim-read a certain letter in Paul's office near the end, you might be very confused by the post-credits sequence. I don't mind them being there, but I tend not to go hunting after or even reading this stuff too much. At least not on a first playthrough. You might think that's a little odd if you're the type of person who goes after all this stuff straight away, but stopping to read something every minute, while maybe immersing me in the world, is pulling me out of the gameplay loop. And especially with an action game, I just don't have that kind of patience. That being said, I'll probably read through all this stuff at a later date on a replay, so it certainly isn't a problem for me that it's there, and if nothing else, it tells us that Remedy had envisioned a much larger living world for this story to take place in. It's a little difficult to give some kind of final thought on this experiment in interactive storytelling, because I honestly don't know how to classify it overall. Judged purely as a game, it's a stylish third-person action traversal game that's kind of on the short side. And yet, the whole really is so much greater than that. If you absolutely hate the idea of your game being broken up by 30-minute episodes of a very well-shot action show, then this game probably isn't for you. I mean, you can get by without it, but you're missing out on a chunk of content that your hard-earned money has paid for. However, when you mix all of the narrative elements with the visual spectacle of the Northlight engine and some really great action set pieces, well, you get something really fun, and dare I say, teetering on the unique side? Is this Remedy's best outing? No. But is it worth your time? Yeah, I think so. As long as you understand this is a narrative-first experience, and don't object to your action being split up with longer conversations and exposition dumps, then this really is a fun and interesting experiment in media blending. It's not a perfect hit, and I'm still not really sure this kind of storytelling will ever really work, but it does what it set out to do, and I found myself really enjoying this, and got really invested in the characters and their journey by the end. So yes, this game gets a recommendation from me. Quantum Break ends with a kind of cliffhanger. The battle is over, but the war has yet to be won. Jack's Chronon Syndrome is only going to get worse. Paul's disappearance has yet to be fully explained, and Monarch is still going strong. Along with this guy. Is the end still inevitable? Can time really be changed? Can the coin land on its side? Not yet! Well, Jack seems to think so, and he definitely hasn't given up on Beth yet.
I'll come back for you.
For now though, those questions remain unanswered, as there is no sequel to this game. On top of that, Remedy split with Microsoft Studios, leaving them without the rights to continue the story. So, just like a unified theory of quantum gravity, the concept of a unified Remedyverse featuring Alan, Jack, and maybe even Max seems completely beyond our reach at this point. But I'll have more to say on this in our next and final outing in this tour of the Finnish developer's work. And so, we come to it at last. Having travelled through crime-filled streets, nightmare-filled forests, and the very fabric of space and time, we finally arrive at the place we were always heading to. Maybe we didn't know it when we started down this road, but it knew. It always knows. It's time to enter the oldest house, a place of power, a focal point, now used and concealed by a covert government agency called the FBC. Tasked with keeping the world safe from the strange and terrifying things that go bump in the night. When this powerful agency falls prey to a truly terrifying force, it will fall to Jesse Faden to step up as the FBC director, fight this all-consuming invasive enemy and... Just a moment. Hello? Old gods of Asgard? Yeah. I need you to say the line. Take control!